Andrew Charlton, your new quarterly essay is called Man-Made World, and it's about choosing between progress and the planet, or the choice between reducing poverty and saving the environment. Do we have to choose?
I don't think we can choose. We face two huge global challenges right now. One of them is eliminating poverty in the developing countries, and the other is managing climate change. And the point I make in the essay is we have to deal with these challenges together. We can't solve climate change unless we assist the developing countries to develop in a way that's consistent with a cleaner energy future. And we can't allow the developing countries, and in fact the rich countries, to continue developing in a way that is inconsistent with the health of the planet. So these are two challenges that we have to deal with simultaneously.
You start off the essay talking about the Copenhagen climate negotiations, which are often seen as a sort of watershed moment in terms of coordinating global efforts to fight climate change. You were there. What did you take away from Copenhagen?
Well, it was a moment of realisation that after 20 years of global negotiations on climate change, in many ways we'd run into the sand. And the reason why we'd run into the sand is because a huge schism had emerged, on the one hand between the rich countries and the poor countries. And the rich countries have their proposals to deal with climate change, which are many, but principally a binding treaty to reduce emissions and a scheme to raise the price of fossil fuels. And suddenly across the table at Copenhagen, the poor countries said, those solutions don't work for us. We're home to 6 billion people who live in different levels of poverty. 2 billion of those live in extreme poverty on less than $2 a day. And you can't ask those people to have more expensive fuel. 20% of the world's population is not connected to the electricity grid. There's no possibility that those people can reduce their energy use or pay more for fuel. They need cheaper and more abundant energy, not more expensive and less energy. And this schism between these two great global challenges of development and climate change suddenly emerged at Copenhagen in a way that it never had before. It had always been there, but it suddenly emerged as a real deal breaker. And I think that our policy frameworks are still trying to catch up with that challenge.
And what do you think should be the role of emissions trading schemes? Are we barking up the wrong tree trying to reach a structure that works for everyone?
Look, I think different policies will work for different countries. Australia is the kind of country that can take an emissions trading scheme, and an emissions trading scheme will deliver a number of benefits to Australia. We will achieve significant gains in energy efficiency at the kind of carbon price we're talking about. We will get a nudge towards some of the near commercial, cleaner energy technologies, probably like gas. But we have to be realistic about what an emissions trading scheme can achieve in rich countries. At the kind of prices we're contemplating, they will not make things like wind and solar commercial. The price would need to be many multiples of the current price to achieve that. But they have their place in rich countries. But the real consideration is we need a global solution to climate change. And any scheme that involves raising the cost of fossil fuels is not going to work for the poor countries. Significant increases in the cost of fossil fuels is unacceptable to countries where they have hundreds of millions of people living in poverty without enough access to energy, without enough access to cheap energy. So these policies simply don't fly in poor countries, and without poor countries we can't solve the problem of climate change, because poor countries, 9 of the top 10 fastest growing emitters are poor countries. About between 70 and 80% of emissions growth over the next 15 years will come from the poorer countries. So we need solutions to global climate change that work in those countries. And my fear is that policies that require a significant increase in the cost of fossil fuels are not going to work in those countries.
So is the solution that we pursue renewable technologies and that these need to be developed in the Western countries so that they can be applied in developing countries? I guess it's very difficult to contemplate answers to this conundrum in developing countries if we really don't have technologies at this stage? I mean, it seems from the logic of what you're saying is that there really is no solution if we're to allow developing nations to continue to develop.
The first thing to say is that any solution to climate change that doesn't accommodate the development and the emergence from poverty of the poor countries is a non-starter. It's unjust.
In terms of a global binding agreement.
Yeah, it's manifestly unjust, and it will be rejected by the poor countries. So any solution to climate change that says you guys can't develop because the environment can't take it is never going to fly. So we can put those solutions off the table. Secondly, any solution to development that requires bringing the 6 billion people on our planet who live in poorer countries up to the level of living standards that we currently live at now in the rich countries is unsustainable for our planet. Our population is already going to rise from 7 billion today to 9.5 billion by mid-century. And to accommodate that 30% increase in the world's population, plus a huge lift in the consumption and living standards of the poorer people, obviously our resources, energy use can't sustain that. So we need solutions that deal with both of these problems simultaneously, and the kind of solution space that is possible is significant improvements in technology. It's not easy to do that. You can't guarantee that that the enormous amount of effort that I'm proposing that we put into new technologies is going to deliver payoffs rapidly, but that is the solution space. And you can only bring developing countries along on the global challenge to defeat climate change if you say to them, we're developing the technologies that will give you energy that enables your people to emerge from poverty and at the same time is clean energy and deals with the climate problem.
Arguably, environmental groups have been saying that we need to develop renewable technologies for a long time, and they would possibly say that governments have not really been paying enough attention or not investing enough. Is this a sentiment that you sort of agree with?
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, clearly we need a much bigger push on renewables, and we need a much bigger push on energy technology. In the essay, I guess some of the differences that I have with some green groups is I think we need all the answers on the table, not just a few answers. And I talk in the essay about how challenging it will be to try and deal with this global problem just with renewables alone. In fact, I make the case that it will be impossible to meet our targets just focusing on renewables.
For mathematical reasons.
The sheer scale of the challenge is physically near unachievable with just renewable energies at our current technologies levels. So I think it's obvious from the scale of the challenge that we're also going to need clean coal, albeit we have to take the criticism that clean coal has had a lot of failures and success is certainly not around the corner. But clean coal, given that new power installation at the moment is still coming 50% from new coal generation that's being installed, unless we have a solution to take some of that carbon out of the atmosphere that's coming out of these coal stations, it's going to be very difficult to achieve our targets. Nuclear is going to be another part of the answer in some parts of the world, not necessarily in Australia, which is a bit of a special case. Renewables and new technologies. So we need a push across the entire spectrum of clean energy technologies.
On the issue of clean coal, Guy Pearce would say that all of the experiments on clean coal have demonstrated that it's a pipe dream, even more so than solar or geothermal or other technologies. Yep. There's absolutely no evidence. It's almost a matter of faith that clean coal might in future work, isn't it?
Look, it certainly is, yeah. And I would have to admit that all of a number of the attempts that we've had to find different avenues for clean coal, which primarily is carbon capture and storage, taking carbon out of coal-fired generators and pumping it underground, that those have been really unsuccessful so far. There's no question about that. It's an extremely difficult challenge, and I don't think anyone can pretend to have the answers. But the reality of the situation is this. a huge part of our global energy infrastructure is coal-fired power stations. At the moment, we're still building coal-fired power stations at a very rapid rate, such that half of all new installed power generation today is coal. Yeah. So unless you deal with the coal problem, it's going to be extremely difficult to meet our targets. And it's not going to be easy to find a solution to find a clean coal solution, but the International Energy Agency, which has done a lot of work on this, makes the point very starkly. If you don't have a clean coal solution, the cost of dealing with climate change increases by 70%. So it becomes much more difficult to deal with the climate change problem if you don't have a clean coal solution. So I would completely agree with all the critics of clean coal, but unfortunately this is not something where we can go, it's not working, let's leave it. We need to push on clean coal as well as other things. And that's not to say that we should use the hope of clean coal to ignore renewables and all the other technologies. We need to push on those things as well.
Putting up clean coal as a possibility is also, it's often used as an excuse to continue to use coal.
That's right, but I guess the argument I'd make to you is that in a lot of these poor countries, in South Africa, which is just building one of the world's largest coal-powered stations, they're going to do that anyway for development reasons. Even if they didn't have the hope of clean coal out there in the future, that's the thing they're going to be investing in coal because it keeps the lights on and it delivers power to a lot of